Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with the second last episode of the Path to Victory series. This time, we are going to be covering the Prairies slash territories. Now, I'm grouping these all together because Manitoba and Saskatchewan have a similar dynamic and are usually polled collectively. They're not identically the same, and ideally, we would only poll each Saskatchewan and Manitoba separately, but they don't. And the other big group, the territories, are just put here because 37 writings for the Alberta video would be a bit much, whereas 31 in this one is more manageable. I don't want to do too many areas because it's not actually the number of writings per se, it's the number of regions being included. And there's just, naturally speaking, more regions. If you the more writings you have, the more regions you have. That's what I'm trying to say. But here we are. So let us begin. So what are we looking at? So this is what the overall region has done. And you'll notice here, if you look at the simplified left-right scale, and just as a reminder, this is the Liberals, NDP, and Greens versus the Conservatives, Reform, and People's Party. In these early days, the Reform and PCs are added together for simplicity. Other is ignored, and Block's ignored, but Block's not normally relevant anyways. Now, in the case of the Prairies, Other is almost always more conservative-leaning people. Things like the Christian Heritage Party are right-ish leaning dissident independents. But we don't have those. We're not considering those, and we're just ignoring them. So it's just CPC and PPC as the right. And what we can see here is, in about the 90s, we have about 60% left and about 40% right. And now, with two pretty mediocre elections in this region, we have about 44% left and about 55% right. That's a pretty big change. Now you might think to yourself, and I think this is reasonable to conclude, that, oh, well, maybe this is just Saskatchewan having moved right, not Manitoba, not the territories. Well, we look down here, and we scroll over to the left a bit. So this is Manitoba, all of Manitoba, and this is all Saskatchewan. And we can kind of see, we'll just hide these because that's just unnecessary math. And you can see a similar trend. Manitoba at large moved from about 60% to about 40% to about 52.5% to about 47.5%, maybe 53 to 47 if we want to be a bit generous. That is a big change. That is 14 percentage point movement. And actually, Saskatchewan has moved even more, going from about 58, give or take, to 42, to about 33, 34, to 66. So, bigger move in Saskatchewan, but Manitoba itself has moved substantially. It's a bit obfuscated in 2021 because the PPC did so flippin' well in Manitoba. And lesser extent true in Saskatchewan. But if you consider that the PPC and the CPC are both the right, you can actually see that this election is a very good performance for them. That would mean 2021 is on par with 2019 and 2008 for performance in Manitoba. And in 2008, the Conservatives did fairly well in Manitoba, an actual seat potential. Now, obviously, if the vote is split between the PPC and the CPC, you will not likely see a similar level of performance, but it is possible because it could rally back to the Conservatives, depending on how Poilievre runs it. Now, a possible natural conclusion of this might be, well, maybe the rural areas are shifting really right in Manitoba, but the urban areas are not. Or maybe they're shifting left. Now, this is a reasonable hypothesis or conclusion because, broadly speaking, right now in the 2020s, urban areas are trending left and rural areas are trending right. Even in Canada, we are seeing this in BC with a lot of rural BC trending towards the Conservatives, whereas the Greater Vancouver area is trending more towards the Liberals or NDP. We might also see a similar phenomenon happen in Atlantic Canada, and if that so happens, this series, this map, might be underestimating them, the potential gains in Atlantic Canada. But I tried to be conservative on the gains. No pun intended. So what does that mean? Well, let's look. Rural Manitoba. We look here. We do this, it's about let's say 49% to about 51, give or take. Some margin of error. Go to 2019 to 2021, and we see about 64 to 35, give or take. Maybe 65 to 35, if you want to be some friendly rounding. Very clearly substantial movement, going from a competitive region to decisively leaning right. And you can even see the PPC does fantastic here in 2021. 12%, one of their best performances in the country for any given region. But that doesn't mean Winnipeg trended the opposite direction. It trended right, just slower. We look in the 90s, again, we're about 78-ish to 32. No, wait, that doesn't make sense. 68 to 32. Sorry, misspoke. 68 to 32, and now we're like 65 to 34. 35, give or take. That's still about a 6-point move. Now, we're not looking anywhere close to 2008 or 2011 numbers in Winnipeg, probably, but it's not implausible that if we see a little bit more momentum here, possibly from a reduced Liberal turnout or increased Conservative performance, the Conservatives could do better here. And you might point out, rightfully so, at 2008-11, the Conservatives did way better. Doesn't that throw off this trend? No. And here's why. This is with two really weak Liberal incumbents. You go over here, you can see they only got about 60,000 votes in Winnipeg. Every other election except 2006, where they ended up, Liberals lost, famously, they had over 110,000, or about 100,000 or more. And even back in 93, 154,000. So it's not so much that it trended left following 2011. It's more like the Liberals started voting again. You can noticeably see here quite easily from 2006 to 2008, turnout dropped by 22,000 as the population increased. Population in Manitoba from 93 to 2021, I believe, increased by like 300 or 400,000, but the voting turnout only increased by about 40. Pretty small. So what does this mean? Well, the first one is pretty straightforward and pretty simple. Most of rural Manitoba is dead safe. There's just no conceivable way the Conservatives lose any of these ridings. Maybe the PPC could snipe like Portage Lisgar in the perfect storm. Maybe. But the PPC are not going to support a Liberal government. Period. Full stop. And they probably would vote confidence for Poilievre to get Trudeau out of government. So even if the PPC pull off the improbable result and snipe Portage Lisgar, that's still going to favor the Conservatives. And then we have Churchill Kowitoonuk ASCII. And this one's a bit more interesting. So nominally, you could argue that this is a quote-unquote safe NDP riding. And this might be extremely bullish on my end. But I don't think it's actually going to be that safe. I would put it closer to this level. A leaning Liberal NDP, but not a shoo-in. The Liberals or the Conservatives could reasonably win it. And I think there is a very good chance they will. We have some polls suggesting that Conservatives are doing a lot better with Indigenous voters, a very large electorate in Churchill, Keweenaw, and also they're doing very good in rural areas. And notably, I think you can kind of guess this is a very rural area. By no means is it a guaranteed pickup, but it is reasonably possible that this could swing Conservative. In fact, a Conservative majority is almost plausible or expected, though not quite enough to me to put it into the Conservative camp, but I think it is definitely leaning. Then we get to Winnipeg. Now, Winnipeg's a bit more complicated. So we have a couple seats here. So we have the first one. This is the easiest one. We have Kildonan and St. Paul. And this is not quite safe, but it's pretty safe. It's probably not going to go anywhere. Then we have Churchill, St. James, Assiniboia, Headingley. Apologies for pronunciations, any Manitobans watching. And if the Conservatives win the election, there's no reasonable way they lose this seat. Now, it's not the safest seat in the world. If they end up losing the election, it's possible Trudeau could pull it, could snipe it. It is a snipeable seat. But, that said, this is a forecast or a prediction or a hypothesis for if the Conservatives could win. Okay. If they're winning, they're not going to lose it, pretty much. How that's going to work out. Then we have another conglomerate of ridings. We have Winnipeg North, Winnipeg Centre, and Elmwood Transcona. Now, some of these, I think, Centre? The Conservatives have won before in 2011, though I don't think it's going to happen this time, or even remotely close. These are seats that the NDP and the Liberals should win, but it's not entirely inconceivable in the case of Winnipeg Centre or Transcona that they could lose them. Exceedingly unlikely. In fact, I might even go so far as to put this into a darker color, but I'll have to reevaluate that later. It seems very unlikely. Not impossible. Wait. I'm gonna amend this actually on the live. Center's probably not possible. Or less possible. In fact, actually, we're going to go even this one darker. On reflection. These two are probably not possible. Transcona is unlikely, but conceivable. And the rest of these are what they are. And then we have this next grouping. So we have Winnipeg South Centre, St. Boniface, St. Vital, and Winnipeg South. Now, Winnipeg South is a seat the Conservatives have won in every single election they've won since '93. I'm not saying it's guaranteed to be pickup, but it is one you should expect them to pick up. They've won in 2006, 8, and 11. In the case of 2006, when they won it the first time, it was a close race, so it's no means a safe guarantee. That's why it's the lightest blue. But that was with a turnout that you might expect Trudeau to get if he's polling in the 30s, which he is right now. So it is plausible and honestly seems kind of likely to win it. Now, the other ones are less... Oh, I realized I just colored all of these wrong. Oop the daisies. Should have been these colors. Grabbed the wrong ones. Apologies. Oh, well, I corrected that one to be the right color. Look at me go. These ones are supposed to be these colors. So then, yeah, so we South Centre and St. Boniface, St. Vital. The Conservatives have won these, I believe. Boniface in 2008 and South Centre only in 2011. So it's not impossible. They have won both. It just seems very, very unlikely. I don't really foresee it as an option, frankly. But it's not entirely implausible. It could happen. Just not very likely. A bit more likely than, say, Mississauga right now, but not terribly likely. So that's Manitoba. Pretty self-explanatory. So what do we got for Saskatchewan? Now, if we look at rural Saskatchewan and we see some of these numbers, and there's just no contest. Almost all of rural Saskatchewan is a complete lost cause for the left. I wouldn't even bother spending a single dollar if I was the Liberals, the NDP here. There's just... It's completely dead. Dead on the water. Back in the 90s, they were competitive and they were winning seats in rural Saskatchewan. Or competitive in seats in rural Saskatchewan. Some were very close, only a couple thousand, like I think 1,000 or 2 votes. And now every single seat's a blowout. Now you could argue, oh, the turnout's really low in rural Saskatchewan. We're only getting about the same turnout we had in the 90s. Maybe a little higher, considering population grew. Sure. But if you actually look where the votes have went, the Conservatives have gained nearly 80,000 voters, up to 110 in the case of 2019, though that was with sheer having home province advantage. So that does kind of twist it a bit. But the NDP have have pretty much lost 20,000 voters, maybe 30,000, depending on how generous you want to be. And the Liberals have nearly monotonically lost. Only 2015 and 2004 breaking the trend. It seems very unlikely they could even recover in rural Saskatchewan, at least with Trudeau on the helm. Maybe some future leaders could do better, but not Trudeau, we're saying. It's not even worth discussing. It's just not possible. Now, there is 2 groups of rural Saskatchewan, though, so I will color them separately. So we have core rural Saskatchewan, and this is, for lack of a better term, the whitest part of Saskatchewan. And this is like the indigenous part of us, or the more indigenous part of Saskatchewan, as like percentages. The more indigenous part is more... It's not like a swing area by any means, but it's a little easier for the Liberals or the NDP, specifically the NDP, because the NDP had traditionally had better support among the indigenous population. But that said, northern Saskatchewan, it's still not going to go anywhere. Des Nethi Mississippi Churchill River is not going anywhere. Now, it's not entirely safe, but it's not going anywhere. Not going anywhere. At least at least until redistricting occurs. After redistricting, that map comes out, that might change this a little bit because they are pushing this a bit farther north. They're making it a bit smaller. It's on the bottom end of the allowable margins, I believe, for population size. And they're doing this so it can better represent the indigenous population in northern Saskatchewan. We can argue the merits or demerits of doing that, but it is what it is. That's what they've done. That said, I still don't think the NDP could win that even with the redistricting. Not impossible. It might be a bit less safe conservative with the redistricting, but I still don't think it's going to happen. Principally because a lot of the indigenous population is moving from the Liberals to the Conservatives. Not so much away from the NDP, but if the Conservative vote share is gaining among the indigenous population, it should offset the losses, I think. But we'll have to get more detailed analysis when someone does all the math for the boundary redistricting on 2021 election results. I don't really want to do that. That's a lot of work, and I know some people are already doing it, so I'm just going to piggyback off of them. Then we have wow. That was a fail. We have Regina and Saskatoon. Now, again, this is a very similar trend. You might think in Saskatchewan, oh, the rurals went super hard. Maybe the urban areas moved differently. No. Going from about 68 to 32 to about 44 to 56. That's a pretty big trend. That's like 48 percentage points. That one from being competitive places where the Liberals and the NDP could win seats in Regina to nope. Not at all. We get a similar story in Saskatoon, though to a little less, smaller degree, one from about 59 to 47. So, only 24 percentage point swing. It's still dead in the water. There's no reasonable or plausible path to winning seats in either of these two cities at this point. Even with redistricting, it doesn't look very possible, but again, if the redistricting changes any of these particular regions wildly, I will probably do a video after that map is officially enforced in 2024, or an amendment to one of these with the redistricting. But until then, this is what it is. Now, these aren't as safe as rural Saskatchewan, but you look at... I might have colored Regina Capel before. Anyways, that one was part of Regina. Oops. Anyways, and then we get all of these for Saskatoon and Regina. Pretty much, the Conservatives should win all of them, especially if they're going to win a majority, or even just win the election outright, I should say. It's hypothetically and plausible that if they did get destroyed in an election, they could lose one or two of these seats. But we're not doing that scenario. And even then, not terribly likely. And then finally here, we have the territories. Now, I'm not going to color every single island in Nunavut and Northwest Territories live, because that would be too much work, and it would look silly. But, what do the territories tell us? Well, if you look at here at the numbers, there's a lot of noise. Now, the population of the territories is pretty small, and it doesn't grow that fast. I mean, relative to... Actually, the country doesn't really grow that fast either. But anyways, they don't have a lot of people, so the same growth rate as everyone else is still pretty slow. And there's a lot of noise because a lot of these communities are very small. You look at Yukon or Northwest Territories. Pretty much the entire population lives in Whitehorse and Yellowknife, respectively. And in Nunavut, a very large percentage live in Iqaluit. For huge, sprawling territories, they're actually very densely populated if you actually look at where people live. Now, that said, Yellowknife or Whitehorse or Iqaluit would still be a small town in every other province. I think Yellowknife is 20,000 people or something like that. Like, we're not talking metropolis cities here. We're everywhere else, this would be a rural small town. But considering the absolute immense scale of these territories in actual square kilometers, and how few people live there, it's surprisingly dense in reality. But the result of this is, since they're all quite densely populated in reality, there's not many small, tiny towns. It's a couple of medium towns, if you will. Elections are extremely swingy in the territories. Candidate quality usually matters in every single riding, but candidate quality overwhelmingly matters in the territories. It's probably the most important single characteristic in the territories. A strong candidate will carry a bad party and a bad platform. That's how you see Nunavut going from the Harper era, where it was a solid conservative territory to now where it's solid NDP. And in the interim, there was a Liberal MP in there during 2015. You see this change not because Nunavut has moved from Conservative to NDP, but because the NDP have run a candidate the people of basically Iqaluit like better. Similar story repeats in Northwest Territories and Yellowknife and Yukon and Whitehorse. If the candidate run is fairly popular in the big town of this territory, they usually win comfortably. Because it's a small area, it's a small town atmosphere, and in those areas, the popular guy usually wins. It becomes more of a popularity contest and less of a platform contest. Then you have the other consideration, too, that usually all these areas are kind of just ignored and left to do as they please anyways by the feds. And the feds don't really do anything for them overtly because they're so small, no one really caters to them. So they don't actually really care about platforms too much. Like, why do they care about the platforms that affect the Laurentian area or the Lower Mainland or the Prairies? They're not any of those. Those platforms don't actually affect them. They don't actually care. Okay. So what's the deal then? Well, they care about the guy who they think is going to represent them the best. So it's a very, 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 very swingy area. That said, there is the potential for the Conservatives to do well here. Now, on paper, this looks very left-wing. And yes, it is. Like, objectively, they vote significantly to the left of the country in the territories. A large reason for that is the Indigenous population historically has liked the NDP. But again, as I've touched on the last two regions, the Indigenous population appears to be shifting more conservative, which will help the Conservatives here and be a big upswing. Then you also have the factor that the rural-urban polarization is real, and it is happening, which should also help propel the Conservatives here. You have some really big ones that will really probably hurt the Liberals, specifically in Yukon and Northwest Territories, which is gun bans and all the gun legislation. These are very high firearm ownership areas. Many, many people have guns, and a large percentage of the people with guns use them regularly. Not only for sport or hunting, but self-defense. If you're in an area where you could get attacked by something like a polar bear, if you're out in the countryside, you need a rifle. Full stop. And then if you actually dig into some of these numbers a bit too. Now, normally I've been, like here still, we've been lumping other with, or we've been ignoring other, sorry. Other's not been lumped in. But in 2021 specifically, most of other in the territories is actually Conservatives. Particularly in the Yukon, you have Jacket Jonas Smith, who Aaron O'Toole kicked out of the Conservative Party. He was the candidate in 2019 in the Yukon for the Conservatives because he opposed vaccine passports. Yeah, that O'Toole. Good old stellar conservative he was. Now, it's not guaranteed that he would run again for the Conservatives following that, but he is quite popular in the Yukon. He would have actually won in 2021. And he is conservative. So if you add him in, and I believe the independent in the Northwest Territories was conservative leaning, though you can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. I researched this a bit, but I only have so many hours in my week, so I can't research it super intensely for every tiny candidate that pops up. Most of these don't have the easiest data to find online. A lot of them are not very well known outside of their areas, basically. But if you lump that in, now you're looking at close to 30% Conservative support or 31% in 2021. So that actually means that they've gained a little bit of ground. That's pretty significant. And I think they're going to be gaining ground yet again. Because principally, just exhaustion with Trudeau, the gun bans, and the fact that Trudeau seems to care almost entirely about urban areas and not at all about rural areas. Now, I already touched on that places like the Yukon are not super hardcore. They don't super care about what happens in the South. But it does affect them. They do have some caring. So what do we got? Well, the Yukon is going to probably look something like this. It's likely going to be Conservative pickup, and it's probably going to be pretty safe. Northwest Territories is a similar idea. It's not entirely safe. It's not entirely guaranteed. But you get the idea. The Conservatives should be able to pick this up. And then the final one, this one is a tricky one. This one's kind of hard to call. And I have two minds on it. I'm not going to cover every single one. I'll just get the big ones here. I am currently going to put this... Wait, I need to double check things. Yeah. I'm currently putting this as lean left. Now, I hear what you're saying already in the comments. The NDP are blowing out Nunavut. They did so well in 2021. How could they possibly lose? Well, first off, we're talking about 10,000 voters. And they only got about 4,000-ish votes in 2021. The idea that they can't lose Nunavut when they only actually need to lose like 2,000 or 3,000 votes. Oh, I actually pulled up numbers here. They only got 2,000 more votes than the Conservatives, period, in 2021. The idea that they can't possibly lose when they only had 2,000 more votes seems unlikely. And when you put in all the other factors, I think it is a possibility. It could happen. Will it happen? Probably not. But it's possible. And that makes sense. And again, one of the big factors here, because Nunavut is one of the areas that has the largest percentage of Indigenous population. And if the Indigenous population is indeed continuing to shift Conservative, that will be a big upswell in Nunavut. There's a small percent, 5-6% swing from NDP to the Conservatives among Indigenous people would be a huge swing just by itself. That would cut the gap by like 500 votes. Then you only need to pick up 1,500 by increasing turnout, increasing numbers, etc., etc. If you go back to 2019 as well, the Conservatives were only down 1,500 votes. It's very possible. When you're talking about these really small areas, the percentages are misleading. There's actually not that many people you need to change minds of. You look at something like Toronto Centre or Portage-Lasgar, the Liberals need to convince the minds of 20,000 people to flip that riding. That's a hard, tall order. If you have to convince 2,000, it's a lot easier. And keep in mind, back in the Harper years, it was won. 2008 and 2011. In 2011, they had 50% of the vote, and then immediately had a 43% swing in 2015. We are not talking about the hardest area to swing. It's not impossible. It's not even unlikely. It happens frequently. In 2008, when Harper won it, we were also looking at right there. It was a 15% swing for the Conservatives. Back in 2006, you saw a 15% swing to the Conservatives. Now they lost it, but that's still a 15% swing there. The Liberals themselves lost 11% in 2006 from the election before. the territories are very swingy. It doesn't take much to swing them. Now, it's not guaranteed, but it is something that's possible. So what does it bring us in the national standings? Well, I have to correct these because we actually have, I believe it should be 1, 1, 2. I think that's what that should be. Let's see. Apologies for correcting this live. I made some changes to my coloration. So now, without Alberta, and I think we can all kind of guess where Alberta's going, we have 141 to 133 with 28 block. Now, the 133 Lib is also including Greens and NDP. So once you consider Alberta, I think you can see how this is a path to a majority. Now, there's a lot of seats here in Category 1, which are going to be narrow pickups. And there are some seats here for the Liberals and the Bloc that there are narrow losses. So there is potential to do better. I hazard a guess here, I think 185 is close to a reasonable ceiling for the Conservatives. And you go the other end, the Conservatives could lose the election. It's not very implausible. Right now, on the scoreboard, they could reasonably end the election with 115, plus Alberta. It's not unlikely. But if they were to win, this is kind of what we would see. And now you could also argue, I think reasonably so, that if we go over here and we look at Atlantic, I'm very likely, at this point, I think I'm underestimating the Atlantic. I think you could probably see more pickups in PEI. Avalon, Central Nova is possible too, especially if a certain candidate runs again, which there's some rumors that he might, but I don't want to suggest it's anything more than rumors. So we could easily see 3 or 4 more seats in Atlantic Canada, maybe even 5. More than what this is. So it gives you an idea. There is room to play here. This isn't locked in. It depends on performances, depends on the election, depends on the campaigns. But there is clearly a path here, because I'm pretty sure you can see, kind of guess what the next video might entail with Alberta. But with that, I will conclude everything here. So if you liked the video, by all means, like, share, subscribe. Comment below what you think the Alberta seat totals might look like, or if I made any mistakes here, if you disagree with any of my decisions in the Prairies. And keep in mind, before you potentially disagree, this is looking at a majority. What they would actually need to win a majority and what is likely to win. This is not to say a majority is guaranteed or likely. Just if they were to win a majority, these are the seats they need to win. More or less. These are the ones that are likely to win, that they could play well in. But with that, I bid you adieu, and I will see you next time with something else.